What's up, everybody, and welcome to part 3 of 7 on how to build the ultimate Ford Straight Six. Now, I know this part has been a long time coming. We're way overdue. We had some different issues between some personal issues and some, work taking over, and then worst of all, some back order parts. But we are finally getting to this, and so I'm happy to bring this to you. And again, I really apologize for the delay. However, as you can see behind me, I've got all of the wire harness connections ready to go. I've got the HOLLEY HP harness set up. I've got all my wiring supply set up, the wiring diagrams ready to go. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be putting this all together and hooking it up to the engine at the same time. I'm going to be doing that in kind of a hyperlapse film configuration. And then when I'm done, I'm going to walk through all the individual pieces and parts as well as some of the details behind the wiring. But without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started.
A few moments later. 2 hours later. 6 hours later. 12 o'clock midnight. The next day. Later. 3 hours later.
Can you move it along? I'm all out of time cards.
All right, so all the harnesses are done. I finished them at like 2:30 in the morning last night. It's been a long last 2 days going through all the wiring and the schematics and getting everything sorted. Big shout out to the guys at HOLLEY. Had a couple of questions along the way just to make sure that we were doing this right. And those guys were super helpful on their tech support line. So thank you guys. So I'm going to get into the details here of all the wiring and all the hardware and EFI that went into this build. Something that I'm going to say out of the gate is that the setup that we have done here is like the end state as far as EFI goes. And that's because we've got some more performance mods planned for the future for this motor that are really going to up the horsepower and really require the ability to have precision adjustability on this motor. And that's why we have sequential port fuel injection. That's why we've got COIL near plug. That's why we have cam and crank sinks. If you're going to a mid-performance build, and by that I mean like a mild turbo, probably looking in the 300s, maybe even the 4s, you don't have to do that. And I'm going to go over a much more simplistic way to have a setup that's capable of supporting that. But because we have some modifications planned that go well beyond that in the future, we kind of needed to learn this full EFI setup and suite out of the gate. So we just took the opportunity to do that. Plus, it's going to let us just dial in the tune just to perfection levels. So, yeah. So without further ado, I'm gonna turn the camera around and I'm going to go through each and every piece here. So before I get into the specifics of what we did on this motor and all of the sensors and harness buildups that we did for this specific motor using the unterminated harness, I kind of want to give you the bottom line up front. I want to give you a cumulative list of what hardware you should be targeting if you want electronic fuel injection based on your power goals and the amount of control or controllability you want to have over your motor. So to start, if you're looking for something mild, you want to increase your horsepower, you want to just get generally more reliability and a smoother ride out of your motor, and you don't want to go through a whole lot of sophisticated mods, start with a HOLLEY HYPERSPARK distributor and the HOLLEY Sniper 1100 EFI throttle body fuel injection unit. So it's a single barrel unit. It has self-tuning software built in, and you can modify the software via the view screen that comes with it to certain levels. And the HOLLEY HYPERSPARK distributor can communicate directly with it, which is really nice. That unit is good for about 176 horsepower. So really easy way to get more, how should I say this? Better performance out of your ride. Now, obviously, without addressing the intake issues on the old log head, you're not going to hit that 176 horsepower cap. You are going to have to address that. But assuming that you do address those, that is a great way to go. Now, if you're looking for even more horsepower, some more extreme mods, but you still want to keep the electronic fuel injection throttle body and you want to keep the setup relatively simple, then you're going to want to look at the HOLLEY Sniper 2300 unit, which is the 2-barrel unit, and that's good to about 350 horsepower. So, you know, all the same benefits as the 1100, it's just better for, it's over a more applicable range of horsepower. And then lastly, if you're really going to be doing some extreme mods on your motor, but again, you want to keep it throttle body fuel injection, you want to keep the self-tuning software there, you want to keep it relatively simple on the fuel injection side, you're going to want to look at the 4-barrel units for the HOLLEY Sniper. Those are good to about 650 horsepower. So, and I reckon that for 95 to 99% of you guys out there, that's probably going to be plenty. I mean, I don't see many people getting past 350, let alone going to 650. You're definitely not going to get to 650 without boost. So, and that's a whole other, application to unpack, and I'm not going to get into that here. Now, for the rest of you who are crazy like I am, and you want to go whole hog and you want full controllability, you want sequential port fuel injection, you want coil near plug spark, you want all the bells and whistles, then you're going to need to look into a HOLLEY ECU, whether that be the HP, Dominator, Terminator, whatever has the V6 software that supports sequential port fuel injection. I know the Terminator and the HP do for sure. I'm not entirely sure about the Dominator, but you're going to want to use that. Now, I can tell you with confidence, based on everything that we learned going through this build in the EFI, that you're going to want to use an LS2 harness. So we were using the unterminated harness, and part of that is because we weren't sure at the time that when we ordered our HOLLEY HP ECU and the unterminated harness, what sensors we were going to need, which ones we wanted to use. We had a pretty good idea, but we weren't sure. Until you actually start putting stuff on the motor, we decided that having the flexibility of the unterminated harness and being able to adjust on the fly was more important for this first build of full EFI conversion of this motor than it was to go with a pre-made harness and the convenience that provides. So, but after going through this and looking at all of the sensors and instrumentation and harnessing and plugs and everything else that we went through, we pretty much ended up making an LS2 harness. We just ended up doing it from scratch with the unterminated harness. So my recommendation is to use the LS2 harness. Now, you're going to want to modify your head for sequential port fuel injection. I will say that if all of the previous configurations had spark controlled from the distributor, perfectly fine. Nothing wrong with that. If you want to go with coil near plug, you have to incorporate the cam sync and crank trigger in order to do so. The HOLLEY software simply doesn't support the HYPERSPARK as an acceptable cam, so to speak, in order to do that. Otherwise, it would be able to do it all by its lonesome. So you do have to incorporate the cam sync and the crank trigger if you're going to go to coil near plug. You can still keep the throttle body fuel injection if you don't want to do it with port fuel injection. But to be honest, at that point, if you've already gone that far, the cost really isn't any different. You might as well go to sequential port fuel injection, because I assume you're going for the top as much horsepower as you can. With port fuel injection, you can swap out your injectors for different fuel flow rates. You can tailor them for different types of fuels if you want to do that. It's probably going to be better for a boost application there instead of the sniper units, which sometimes can struggle with boost. So it just depends on what you're aiming for, but I recommend that you go with the LS2 harness. Use the 1000 CFM throttle body, since it already has all of 3 different sensors built into it that directly plug into that harness. The LS2 harness can directly plug into the 3-wire crank trigger and the HOLLEY HYPERSPARK distributor. It's pretty much ready to go, and that's the recommendation that I make to you. Now, so I think that kind of covers everything. I'm sure future me will have done a good job of editing of, this config, this config, this config, this config, based on what your horsepower goals are and how much controllability you have. But without further ado, I'm going to kick it back to other me, and we're going to get back into specifically what we did for this build and some of the lessons learned along the way. Okay, so what I'm going to start with first is the instrumentation / wiring that every build is going to need. And that all comes in different flavors. So if you're going with a more precision tune version, you're not really going with a carburetor setup. Odds are you're going to want an idle air control sensor, air temp, and then lastly, you're going to want your throttle position sensor. This is assuming that you're going with a HOLLEY HP setup. If you're not going with a HOLLEY HP or a Dominator or a Terminator, you can go a bit more old school on this. But one of the things that I really like about the HOLLEY 1000 CFM throttle bodies is that all of that comes built in. So you don't have to figure out where to mount it and what you're going to do with it. It's all ready to go. So that's where you can do that. Now, on the other side of things, the coolant temp sensor. So normally this is located on the other side of the cylinder head right here, which if you want to do that is fine. However, it makes it kind of a pain a little bit, having it back here. So what we decided to do here, after thinking about the hoses for AC and everything else, and we may end up relocating it back there, but honestly our plan is just to modify the hose setup up front so that the coolant temp sensor can be up front right next to the pump, which you think provides a more accurate reading of the circulating fluid, since in the back it has a tendency to stagnate to some degree. So this is really your choice. It's just a simple 2-pin configuration. I'm going to get to the injectors here in a second. I'm going to pull those back out because that's one of those, if you want to go to the next level or not kind of things. Let's see here. The other side, you've got your oil pressure sending unit. Now, this is not our final unit. You can see we've had an adapter. It's got this, it's really cantilevered out here. It's not ideal. What we're actually going to do in the future is we're going to upgrade to a 3-pin oil pressure sending unit that is already has the correct thread size, so that you don't have this big long cantilevered mass. It should shorten to about half this length. And with a 3-pin, you can get actual oil pressure measurements that you can feed into your ECU, as opposed to just getting a, signal that says, I have pressure or I don't. So, now in the original 4200, this is where your fuel pump was. It was a kind of a tab lever based fuel pump that ran off of a lobe that was ground into the camshaft to operate it, and that's perfectly fine to still use. We're going to be going to an electronic fuel pump that is in the tank. And we may even have a fuel pump booster way down the line when we get to our more extreme mods. So your choice on that one. It is kind of bulky. It's another reason why I didn't want to put it here, but perfectly fine to use that fuel pump. Next is the distributor, and I'm gonna get into this a little bit more here in a second because there's a couple of different ways that you can actually take this. So I'm gonna come back to that. I'm gonna go just kind of an overview now. So if you're looking for general wiring, again, this is for a full EFI. You're gonna need all of those sensors: throttle position sensor, IAC, and air temp. There's a couple other that you're gonna need that aren't on here. Let's see here. One is get the light a little better, is the MAP sensor. So manifold absolute pressure. This is not on here right now because we didn't have a good place to mount it, and we're not actually sure we want to mount it here. So for the dyno, we were actually thinking we would mount it off of the engine. And the manifold absolute pressure can just be hooked up using a hose for one of these vacuum ports, of which there are like 4 on the HOLLEY 1000 CFM throttle body. It's another reason why I really like it. If you're going to be using a lot of operations that have vacuum, I like that it's already built in and ready to go. We're not going to be doing that. I do have, let's see, where is it? I've already wired in the harness. There it is. Wired in the harness for the MAP sensor, so we're good to go there. I know this probably looks like a rat's nest right now. That's just because it's, it's not on the dyno, secured and stowed and everything else. One thing I will say too is that this is a temporary harness that we have used purely for the dyno. The final harness configuration, when it goes into the car, into the engine bay, we're going to be doing custom cut lengths and everything else just to make sure that everything is stowed and really nice in terms of lengths and how it looks and how it's shielded and protected. So we'll go back, and when we throw this into the car, we'll make some adjustments for a better looking configuration. Okay, so now moving on to the EFI stuff that is specific to the level of performance that you want to get to. So first off being coil near plug spark. If you are going to do this, I would recommend only doing it for like the highest horsepower builds, like we're gonna do. This requires a lot of modification and effort, not only to the wiring harnesses, but to other parts of the system. So to give you an inclination, coil near plug spark, where you have a dedicated smart coil for every single cylinder, or in some cases they have like dual prong ones that'll do 2 cylinders, but that really only works for a V8 configuration. You have to have a cam sync and you have to have a crank sync in order for that to work. So if you're not doing the highest horsepower builds on a Ford 200, the easiest way to get mid to high level horsepower builds without needing coil near plug spark ignition is to get yourself one of these, and that is a HOLLEY HYPERSPARK distributor. Now this one looks a little bit different, you might notice, and that's because we've made specific mods for this build to do coil near plug. But normally what you can do is just have the HYPERSPARK distributor with all your plug wire points up top. It's a Hall effect distributor And it's capable of it has an adapter harness that comes with it. So if you're running a sniper unit, which is I'm going to get into here in a minute, you can just hook it right up. So that would be my recommendation, is to get a HYPERSPARK from HOLLEY and just use that. It'll be able to keep up with whatever really you can throw at it until you start getting into some really crazy stuff. And what that does is that means you no longer need a cam sync, which is what we've done. We've converted this HYPERSPARK into a cam sync, and you no longer need to have a crank trigger or a crank sync, which is what we have here. Now, this is the flying magnet configuration with the magnet sensor. We're going to be converting this into a Hall effect, so a 3-wire instead of a 2-wire. But in the meantime, this will do just fine. But as you can see, that crank trigger required a lot of custom fabrication. So we had to get spacers for the flywheel so that it didn't interfere with the belt pulleys. We had to insert and rivet in the magnets at these set intervals. And then coming over here, we had to fabricate some custom brackets. And now these are in a modular configuration so that we can adjust it for dyno and tuning purposes. This will eventually get replaced with a nice polished aluminum bracket that's nice and thick and gets integrated with the AC and the alternator and everything else. But we fab this up for dyno purposes, but it's quite a bit extra work there. So leading into, if you want to go with a configuration that'll do plenty of horsepower, it'll do boost, and you don't want to do all that extra work, let alone like the harnessing and the cost and everything else, my recommendation, get yourself a HOLLEY HYPERSPARK distributor for the Ford 200. And then go with a HOLLEY sniper unit. Either the HOLLEY Sniper 1100, which is a single barrel that's good up to 175 horsepower. Especially if you're using an original log head. But if you want to go higher horsepower, get to that top end without going crazy, use one of the 4-barrel sniper units. And what's really nice about that is they have self-tuning software, but also the HYPERSPARK can directly communicate with it, which is great. And that's done, I think I have the harness over here. Here it is. That's done with this harness right here. So we're not going to be using that. We don't need it. So that is my recommendation. If you want to take a simpler route that is honestly going to be good for 99% of the folks out there working on a Ford 200, get yourself a sniper unit with a HOLLEY HYPERSPARK distributor. That's the way to go. Now, for the rest of you who are crazy, like us, and you want to take it to the next level, you're going to need to start looking at sequential port fuel injection so you can change your injectors out for larger sizes. You're going to need a throttle body. You're going to need coil near plug. You're going to need your cam and crank sync. And so let's get into that. First, we have our sequential port fuel injection. So the cylinder head has been bored out and modified to accept these, as well as the fuel rail that you can see here. You will need to hook up a fuel pressure sensor, which I haven't done yet, just because we have one at DC Racing that we'll be able to use. It is the purple wire hidden in this bundle here. The injector harness is honestly very, very simple. So each injector is only 2 wires. They all run off of common power. It's a 14 gauge wire that's on the main harness. which would be this guy here. So these, yeah, the 214 gauge wires that are coming off of the main harness that stem from the main relay that's built into the harness here. So yeah, they all run off of common power, which are the red lines in these harnesses. And then you have your injector output from it's the PB2 connector here. It's the output connector on the HP. The primary one is for inputs. This is for outputs. This is what controls all your stuff for programmable purposes, including the injectors, including your smart coils. So anyway, that's just your output pin, basically, that turns it on and off via the ECU. So an extremely simple harness. That was the very first one that we fabricated up. Just hooks into these injectors and then just hooks up to that connector as well. So that's for the injectors. Very simple, very easy to do. Now, to get into the more complicated part, and I've got these connectors in here just to protect the pins right now. I don't have the harness showed up or available to show right now. It's packaged up, getting ready to go to DCU this morning. But the way these work is they're a 5-pin unit. And 4 of the 5, the last 4 of 5 pins, are all common wiring. So they have 5 pins, A through E. The first pin, pin A, that's your individual sensor wire. That is what goes to your EST on the ECU. So these are individual pinouts on the ECU for controlling individual coils. Now the rest, as you can see, are common. So pin 2 or pin B, really, that's the sensor common ground. So that would be your black with white wire on the ECU. So that's just for grounding all the individual sensor wires that are sending a signal from the ECU. The rest are all common power and grounds. So pin C, that's your common ground that has to go to the cylinder head. It doesn't go back to the ECU. Pin D, that's your common chassis ground. So that would go to the battery or to the chassis of the vehicle. Ideally, the battery, in my opinion. And then last, you have your common power, which uses the same 14 gauge power supply that the injector harness unit or injector harness uses. So what you're actually going to have to do is you're going to have to create a split in each of those 2 wires to provide an additional one for this harness. So if I could make a recommendation, I would say buy a prefabricated harness for a like a V8, since they don't sell a 6-cylinder smart coil harness. Buy a prefabricated V8 one and then just take off some of the heat shrink, remove 2 of the smart coil plugs, and then just use that. It's going to be so much easier fabricating all of the common ground stuff, all the common stuff. It really kind of sucks, especially since with these type of connectors, you have to thread in. Yeah, you can tell from the weatherproofing on the back, the style, that you have to thread in all your wires first, crimp them down onto the female pins, and then pull them back in, and then seat the weather stripping. And it's just a pain in the butt. You can do it. Didn't love it. So anyway, that's for the smart coils. that's how you hook up the smart coils. Now, the cam and cranksync, and this is where things got a little fun. Now, the Holley HYPERSPARK distributor is really a nifty unit. So it has a 6-tooth reluctor wheel, a Hall effect sensor inside. And you know what? I'm going to grab a screwdriver. So it has a 6-tooth reluctor wheel in there. And it's normally set up to function just like any other distributor. But because it's Hall effect and it's all digital, with respect to you no longer need vacuum advance, which is really, really convenient. It's just naturally built in, not to mention the fact that it's able to directly communicate with a sniper unit. Anyway, what's interesting about that reluctor wheel is that one of the gates inside of there is a little bit smaller than the others. Well, the tooth is smaller, the gate is actually a little bit bigger. So it's able to tell what cylinder one is, even just as a distributor, which is really a neat little feature. Now, what we did is we turned this into a cam sync. So it was already a Hall effect sensor, which is great. Output didn't need to be changed. We didn't have to do anything goofy other than make some mild modifications. So in order to use smart coils, you have to have a cam sync and a crank sync, and which means that you need to convert your cam sync to single pulse. And that's what we've done here, is we actually cut off all the other teeth, so there's no longer any teeth or gates in here. Now you could do this either way for signal rising or signal falling. What you could have is just a single gate and the rest all be material, or you can go like what we did and just trim off all the teeth and just have a singular tooth that flies through that sensor. So that's the modification you need to do for the HYPERSPARK distributor if you're going to go to a coil near plug to get it to single pulse. Now what I did is I took some measurements, catted up an adapter here to get us some additional height. It's actually quite a bit too tall. I might make another one in the future just to bring the stack height down, but for now this one will work just fine. That was to adapt us for our cap plate, this MSD cap plate here, so that we didn't have all those prongs hanging out, because they were unnecessary at this point. So next is the crank trigger. Now this is the MSD 7-inch universal flying magnet from Holley. It's a really nice looking unit, polished aluminum. You can set in however many magnets you need depending on your engine configuration. If you go at a straight 4, straight 6, V6, V8, even a V12 will work with this. So this is a really nice unit. You do have to drill your own holes, and because this needs to be perfectly concentric, don't do that willy-nilly. I probably spent 4 hours verifying all of my measurements here and making sure that this thing was perfectly concentric. And I think overall I managed to get it with just 1 to 2 thou of non-concentricity or wobble with respect to the sensor itself, which is fine. The sensor has a nominal 40 thou gap, so 1 or 2 thou doesn't make or break the bank. But you do also need to fabricate a way to mount the sensor. Now, the other thing I will say with respect to this is that this is the 2-wire magnetic sensor. I recommend that you swap this out for the 3-wire Hall effect sensor. It's the exact same housing. It's the exact same shape. Other than just like, instead of a hex here, there's a flat. The the Holley HP software really likes Hall effect as opposed to magnet. Now, the magnet will work, and that's what we're going to use for the time being, but we will be upgrading this in the future so that both of these are Hall effect sensors. The other reason that I recommend that you do that is that Holley already sells a harness that's designed to go to both 3-wire Hall effect sensor applications and plug directly into the ignition connector on the unterminated universal harness, which is what we have. So it literally just becomes plug and play, which is great. If you can save yourself some fabrication time and effort, that's going to be the way to go. So now as how you mount this, that's up to you. Well, specifically the sensor. Like I said, I took some measurements, drafted up some CAD, and had these CNC plasma cut. And then I just mounted them onto the side there. Again, this is temporary for dyno testing. Eventually, this will all get a really nice, big, polished aluminum bracket for all the accoutrement that's going to go with it. You know, AC, alternator, all that fun stuff. So, oh, right. Wideband O2 sensor. So this is a 8-wire unit here. So I don't have this hooked up right now because it's going to go into a collector for the dual 3-to-1 exhaust. We have to fabricate that at DC Racing. Because you don't want the wideband O2 going here. You want a little bit more downstream, and once they've all collected into a single area for tuning purposes, what we'll do most likely is we might throw in another wideband O2 sensor so that we have it for either side, just to make sure that, you know, we can dedicate one to each of the 3 cylinders, just to make sure we can get better data, make sure nothing's going on with either of them in the future, just to kind of future-proof it. Let's see, what else? I don't have the ignition harness. Technically, the harnessing is 6 wires in here. I was going to do that at DC. Okay, so this is the HP unit itself. It also comes with a small flash drive that you can access via micro USB terminal here for the purposes of tuning. This is how you interface with this. There's also a CAN harness / connector that you can use to do it that way if you want. I haven't hooked it up yet, just because I don't know what the tuner that we're going to be hiring prefers. So let's see here. But yeah, this is the Holley HP. It does have an ambient pressure sensor port here. And this is your primary power. That's what this harness is for here. I've left it unterminated just because I don't recall what DC uses as a power supply. So I didn't want to put ring terminals on there just in case they needed to use something else. Forgetting anything else? I don't think so. I think that's the bulk of the entire EFI system. I will say that what this is the Holley HP unterminated harness. You could probably use the LS2 harness or another harness and get yourself quite a bit of the ways there, but you will have to make some modifications specifically to, say, the smart coils and the injectors. But if you were going to buy a prefabricated harness for those, you were going to have to do that anyway. So and if you go this route, full whole hog craziness, even with the cam and cranksync, it honestly might be worth it. I'm going to do a little bit more investigating into that front. But by and large, that really covers the entire EFI setup. So now what I will say is, just because you've wired it up doesn't mean it's ready to go. You do have to create an engine profile in the HOLLEY software. Now in this case, you need to use V6 or later, because before that, V5 and prior did not have sequential port fuel injection. It was only multi-port fuel injection. So you need to be using version V6 or later, which is readily available. You can find it online if it doesn't already come preloaded nowadays on the USB stick with the software built into it. So keep that in mind. So yeah, you do need to generate an engine profile with all of your instrumentation. You'll need to verify that it's all hooked up correctly. And then lastly, you're going to need to tune it. And you have to do that on a dyno. I recommend that if you're not a tuner yourself, I'm not a tuner, you hire somebody to tune it. Now, that being said, I do have something very interesting to propose to you guys. We are going to be hiring a tuner. The tuner we have hired has made it clear that as part of his services, the tuning profile that is generated for us becomes our property afterwards, which means we can do whatever we want with it. So what I am proposing to you guys is that if you want it, I am happy to make that tuning profile available to everyone. That being said, it's not the cheapest thing in the world. And so I would probably have kind of either like a GoFundMe or something of that nature, or if individuals want to do it at a fraction of the cost, you can DM me. So if that is something you guys are interested in, let me know, write it out in the comments, and we'll look into options for making that available. Obviously, we would never charge anything once we had managed to, we'll just say, we'll go into the black. So whatever we pay for the tuning profile, once we've accomplished that, we would never ask anybody to charge past that unless it was done on an individual basis. So what I'm thinking is, if you guys are interested in that, I'll probably put out like a GoFundMe or a Kickstarter or something. And once that target is reached of what we paid for it, I will release it to the general public for anybody to use. With respect to the harnesses and all the parts and everything else that we've used here, that is going to be in the description down below with links to everything. I am planning to reach out to HOLLEY to see if maybe we can't put a bundle together as a new part number on their website. So for anybody trying to do this in the future, it's just all in one location. Now, obviously, that doesn't apply to the head, but everything else it should apply for. So, yeah, I think that does it. I mean, that's the EFI. Obviously, if you guys have questions, concerns, whatever it is, let us know. Write it down in the comments. Let us know what you think. I am so stoked to finally get this over to the dyno. There's been so many delays, and we were behind on getting this video out. I had a couple of personal issues come up. I've had some had to travel for work, and then we, worst of all, had some back order of some of the parts that we were trying to get, and we had to finish waiting on in order to get them. But yeah, let us know what you guys think. I'm really excited, and I hope you guys are too. We're paving some new, we're treading new waters here in the Ford Straight 6 realm. So until then, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys